In order to enforce a boundary or to create a boundary with someone, they have to care. They have to care about you. They have to have empathy, and not just cognitive empathy where, yeah, I can see why you're upset with me. I mean, compassionate empathy, somatic empathy, where the person that you're talking about literally has an emotional experience of your experience, so they can actually feel the way you feel. When you're talking to someone who has high narcissistic traits, you end up feeling so frustrated because sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, I understand why you feel that way, but nothing changes. They don't have the capacity or the desire to really care about your reality. When you're talking to someone who has high narcissistic traits, they're trying to stay 10 steps ahead of you. They're trying to figure out how they can prove you wrong. So when you're trying to exert a boundary with someone who has high narcissistic traits, it doesn't work because they literally don't care about your perception. They can't hear you. That was a huge epiphany in my world when I realized that I was in a relationship with someone who was wired to not hear me. Whatever I said went through a filter that just garbled up everything that I said, turned it into something that I was not saying. Living with someone or experiencing someone who you see as a 3D autonomous being, you hear what they're saying, and you're trying to adjust, you're trying to negotiate, you're trying to meet them halfway. You assume that this person is receiving you the same way. That doesn't mean that everyone that you bump into has the same desire. Other people have their own perception. Just because they're walking and talking, they appear to be logical and rational, and other people sometimes love them so much, and just because they seem to have their life together doesn't mean that when you're trying to engage on a vulnerable, intimate level, where you're trying to feel seen and see this other person, that doesn't mean they have the ability to see you. And that is mind-blowing. So when you're dealing with someone who has high narcissistic traits, what you will consistently notice is that they cannot hear you. When they repeat what you've said, it is not what you have said. But they don't care, number one, about your reality, and number two, they can't even hear you. Number three, boundaries only work with people who want to negotiate. When you're dealing with someone who has high narcissistic traits, they don't even realize that they're not negotiating. They think they're negotiating, but they're not. They think they hear you, but they don't. They think they care about your reality, but they don't. And you're left in this weird space feeling like nothing feels right. Everything feels off. Like, what am I missing? If you've moved back enough and if you observe the relationships that you've had in your world with people who you think have high narcissistic traits, what you'll notice is they never negotiated. It was always their way or the highway. A few times where they seemed to go along with you, they punished you the whole way. So they were resentful. They were reactive. They tried to minimize you. So let's say they didn't want to go with you to an event, and they go to this event. And in their head, they're negotiating because they're going to the event, but they're going kicking and screaming. They're late for the event. They don't wear what they told you they were going to wear. So maybe it was supposed to be a black tie affair. So they come in jeans, but at least they showed up, right? This passive aggressiveness. Or they sabotage the whole event. They're aggravating you the whole time. They're punishing you because they went. In their head, they're negotiating. They showed up. That's not negotiating. That is punishing you for asking them to do something they didn't want to do. If you look back on your life and you look back on these types of experiences, what you'll notice with the people that you feel may have had high narcissistic traits, those really high conflict relationships that you just couldn't get from point A to point B with, you will notice always this inability for the other person to negotiate fairly. And if they did do something you asked them to do, they punished you. And they never let you forget that they did this thing. Another issue that you'll find is that boundaries only work with people who don't fear feeling like they might be wrong. So when you're dealing with someone who is highly narcissistic, they have every excuse in the book for why they verbally abused you. Well, I did that because, and I said that because, and he made me angry, and she irritated me, she annoyed me, she should have never said that, he should have never done that. A boundary only works with someone who can feel remorse, can feel guilt, and can feel empathy for the person that they have abused in some way. Someone with really high narcissistic traits does not go there. Boundaries are going to work with someone who is capable of self-reflection. Another reason that boundaries don't work with a narcissist is because you're probably focusing on what the narc has been doing to upset you rather than focusing on how it makes you feel. When you're in this relationship, it's really hard to sometimes see how or what you're doing wrong. Lots of times we are so hell-bent on trying to convince someone that they're hurting us that we don't stop, we don't look, and we don't listen, and we don't ask ourselves, how is this making me feel? We focus on them. We focus on the person who's hurting us rather than focusing on what we need in the moment, which is peace, which is calm, which is healing. We need boundaries. We need to assess the situation. We need logic. We need reason. We need the ability to step back and set a boundary with ourselves and say, whoa, 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 how am I losing myself to trying to convince this person that they're wrong and that they're hurting me? Am I dealing with someone who can't see me? Am I dealing with someone who is always doing this? Why do I keep giving my energy to this? If you're trying to set a boundary with someone who's consistently hurting you, it might be because you're not focusing on what matters, and that is how you feel about what's happening. You can't set a boundary with someone when you keep focusing on what they're doing wrong, because the boundary that you need to set is not outside of you. The boundary that you need to set is within you. So what do we take away from this idea that boundaries don't work with certain people? Well, we have to be a lot more objective and a lot more self-aware when dealing with other people. We have to be aware of ourselves. Are we making sure that we are someone that other people can come to and negotiate boundaries with? We have to check ourselves first. It always comes back to the self first, and living with integrity. Now, if you're someone who is into personal development work and you're monitoring yourself and you're policing your own thoughts and you're making sure that you're showing up as a fair person and you're doing your self-care work, you're meditating, you're journaling, you are aware of yourself and you're continuing to raise your consciousness and your vibrations and your awareness of self, that's amazing. You want to always make sure that you are staying in the seat of the observer when it comes to your relationships with other people. Why? Because you need to be able to monitor from a detached space how this person's energy is affecting you. You have to make sure that you're not losing yourself to toxic relationship. You want to make sure that you have personal ego boundaries, which means that you know what your must-haves are and you know what your deal breakers are. You know when you are going to walk away. You know when enough is enough. You know when you will no longer tolerate whatever it is you're tolerating. You don't know that if you're lost in the fog of codependency. You don't know that if you're seeking approval. You don't know that if you're trying to control something you realistically cannot control. You don't know that if you're losing your energy to an energy vampire. You don't know that. And that's why I think sessions like this are very beneficial, because they help to clarify what we're doing wrong. Hey, if you love this content, don't forget to check out the next video, and you can go to my website and take the codependency quiz.